Hi, everyone. I am John Canning, and welcome to 2021. We are virtually at CES. A lot of us are actually lamenting the fact that we're not there because it just kind of it feels lonely. And we have an assembled group of people today that it's friends, colleagues, and a great group of people that I say kick off 2021. With that, I'm going to let each person give a who they are and a quick intro. So if you don't happen to know one of these people, A, I'd be shocked, but B, then you'll have a clue. So with that, I feel like Hollywood Squares always. With that, Boo, why don't you lead us off?
Okay. Hi guys. Yeah, and actually like thinking back about CES last year, like I was so like by day 4 you're just miserable. You're just like, "Oh my God, I never want to do this again." But I really didn't mean that.
Right.
I do want to get back out there. Anyway, I'm Bu Wong. I'm the global head of emerging technology, the global director of emerging technology at the Mill. We're part of the Technicolor family of companies. We've been around for 30 years, Technicolor over 100, deep roots in film, visual effects. And I head up the team that has dealt the most with real-time tools for use in virtual production, as well as in XR, interactive, and also experiential, interactive as far as experiential kind of opportunities for entertainment, for marketing, and with technology product teams. So that's my short introduction.
Thank you. Welcome, Boo. Christina Lee Storm.
Hi, great to have everyone here to kick off 2021. Basically, my background 15 years plus working in the cross section of story, content, technology. I've worked in AR, VR, game engine, animation, and I originally started in like documentaries and features and feature producing. And I'm just joined actually Netflix at the end of 2020. Very excited to be working with the virtual production team and help lead just and what we call our NLab initiatives to help adopt virtual production to Netflix's global content slate. So I'll probably talk a little bit more about my background maybe later.
Don't worry, we will not ask you deep improving questions about Netflix.
Awesome.
Mr. Shilowitz.
Hi, John. Hi, everybody. Nice to see everyone. It's always, even though it's a modified version, it's still really nice to see everybody's faces and people that I interface with in various ways. My name is Ted. I'm the futurist at Paramount Pictures, which is part of a large media enterprise called Viacom CBS that many of you have heard of. And my job and role is to explore the boundaries of technology and entertainment across all the divisions of our large group. And we touch a lot of people in a lot of ways with media at scale, as many of others that work here do. So I have a really interesting, very fun and stimulating job in the business. And certainly this year, and we can dive into this as much as you want, has been unique in so many ways. And without making light or discounting the horror and tragedy of so many families and so many people around the world, there are a lot of things we've learned about ourselves as people and about technology and use case at scale and the benefits of the worlds that this group here with our little Brady Bunch boxes is a good example of people that have been doing this well before this year of pandemic and will continue to do it well after. And a lot of people have recognized, certainly in all the companies that we work with, that we were always the wacky ones off to the side. Like, what do those people do? I don't understand. And it turns out, well, now everybody knows what we do, and they're relying on us a lot to help us figure out a path forward. So I'm happy to be here.
Great. This is the year of they get me. They really get
They
me.
really get me.
Brett?
Hi, I'm Brett Leonard. Great to be here with this august group. I've been telling stories about virtual reality for over 30 years and, directed some films that helped introduce that concept to global culture. So, and then I somehow it's led to me actually doing the real thing. It's sort of been an organic process. Really starts as being a storyteller, and for me, this whole year has been a really interesting inflection point. Obviously, I echo all the things that Ted just said. In terms of the tragedy, the attrition, the huge challenges that so many face, and yet on this virtual experience, I call it VX, virtual experience side of things, it is an inflection point that's pushed so many other things, verticals in human culture into virtual experience, and so it's become a kind of bellwether moment in the virtual world, and obviously we're here to talk about virtual production and immersive production. And I finished a feature film this year in post-production, social distancing and getting tested, all of those things. So it's been a very mixed bag of a year that we just got through, and I really look forward to 2021 being a kind of integration of all these things that we've been learning. For me, the main focus has been, what is the creative process that comes out of this new tech stack that we're utilizing? Because so much in our business and in media production is tradition bound. It's bound in romance for a certain way of doing things, and yet the tools are insanely different. And so I'm just looking at starting with the idea that Stanley Kubrick said once, the screenplay is the most incommunicable form of literature ever devised. And he's the reason I make movies, because I saw 2001: A Space Odyssey when I was 7 years old. So I kind of follow his lead, and I think that we're in a moment now where there can be true integration and innovation in the process around which we make media, not just the tool set changing. And that's what I'm interested to talk about here.
Cool. And last, but certainly not least, Mr. Nigel Tierney.
How are you, everyone? Again, real honor and pleasure to be with you all virtually. My name is Nigel Tierney. I actually head up content for Riot, which is the innovative creative studio as part of Verizon Media. And I think, obviously, given everything that we've gone through, it's what's really interesting to kind of discover is, the forcing function that has accelerated what we've imagined the future to be. Think of things like telemedicine and, distance learning and, virtual production, all these things which were kind of promises of the future are now forced upon us. And so it's been interesting to see what we're learning from that under those circumstances. And I think also from a, to get this panel's bingo words out of the way, talking about 5G, that would be, there you go.
Well, I've got a drink.
yeah. Take a shot every time you hear it coming from my mouth. But like the need and dependency on communication technologies to be able to do all of these things. And so kind of figuring out how does that affect storytelling and creating content, so and consuming it as well.
So, and then, that's a great place to just launch off, is that I challenged all of the panelists, which wasn't a terribly big challenge or terribly thought-provoking question, but we all find ourselves going, well, I didn't see that coming this year. And, there's a lot of different kinds of things. Obviously, we didn't see that none of us would be traveling the way we had, but Boo, and all of you, just that, take that moment and say, all right, what is that area that, be it the technology, media creation, even affecting our jobs, what is that? You just didn't see it coming. Obviously, we couldn't have anticipated it. And where did it take us? And we'll go all around. So, and pick through that. But, how about for you? We'll just dive in.
Yeah. And, guys, let's have a conversation about this.
Yeah, right.
So we can interrupt this cow each other on it. Because I think that, I think that, a lot of us wouldn't be worth our salt as well, especially with, us looking at, the leading edge of technology or, futurists within this space. I think there's a lot that we did see coming. Yes. Of course, we're not all knowing, so there are certain things we definitely missed, but there are a lot of these things that I think that we didn't see the rate at which it was going to happen. But I think we saw a lot of these things like on the horizon. That being said, I think that just kind of big picture wise, the thing I didn't see coming was actually the, based on time, was the unevenness, what we were going to be experiencing. It's like the unevenness of the response to an effect of COVID by geography, like it slowed things down for a lot of us in many ways, like in the West. However, when I talk to family and people in the industry, say in Asia, for instance, they're actually not having the same types of conversations that we're having. It's a very different types of conversation. I think that for us, in this location, I think that we're definitely, as some of you have touched on, the acceleration, within innovation, the evolution that happens the fastest during times of stress or change in conditions or scant resources, and we've innovated so fast into moving like production, like onto virtual sets, XR for everything from like conference calls to conferences to virtual events to concerts, and actually like collaborative workflows as well. So in some ways it was like, it's not like I didn't see it coming, but I didn't see the adoption of it happening so quickly. Shoots to go onto virtual sets, or like, within our own teams, like, not just using XR for the executable deliverable, the app that we're delivering at the end, but like actually as part of the workflow, or virtual location scouts. That was just kind of a nice to have, but now it's a must have. So I think that, to that extent, I think, for those of us like on the leading edge of these things, we're definitely, the thing that I've been most impressed by is the speed of innovation. And I'm super excited about that because we're, we've had to do it. And like the stuff that's going to come out of it, kind of in the long term, kind of like, human machine interfaces, or like the acceleration of XR, because we have to get there. And certainly, different things within virtual production itself is just happening. The thing that I didn't see coming was the speed at which it's going to be happening now. Like this accelerant that's been poured on.
Agreed. I mean, just chime in, midway through, well, I'll start with the beginning of 2020 was, for me, I was at DreamWorks leading the advanced creative technology team, right? And it was like, we were coming out of like, we just launched an LBE for How to Train Your Dragon, and people were going to it. Right. And then
we actually went to the mall to like try it out.
Many of you look back on Instagram and Facebook, and it was like, yeah, this is awesome, great content out there. And then the next thing we know, I'm talking to my team and it's like, let's talk about remote working. Let's do a test. This is before the quote unquote shutdown. And so, we had 1 day tests, and the next day it was like, we're all working from home. And, thankfully we were already thinking, it's like, okay, great. How are we going to do this? And the brilliance of my team members, so then we're working remotely, in a real-time multi-user collaboration. This is how we have to work to continue to make the project. We had a interactive real-time project for one of the theme parks, and it's like, how are we going to, we have to still deliver. There's not necessarily a yes or no. And, that was like springtime. Then the next, I'm leaving DreamWorks, and the next thing I know, because there was so much conversation, we're in the middle of COVID, there's so much conversation about virtual production, I literally create a shingle called Asher XR to address the fact that there's a need for strategic development on virtual production and XR, and doing that, and really at the beginning of that, it was like sort of a convincing, like, this is why you should do this. And it was still the early wave, right, of virtual production. The next thing I know, and like I was talking to Boo, I was like, she didn't realize, the next thing I know, in the summer, I'm going to Vancouver to produce Solitary, which stars David Oyelowo. Now I'm swinging all the way to the other side of the pendulum of like working in traditional feature film. It was a Bronze Studio film. And so I'm there, masked up, COVID protocols. This is the new generation of what a feature producer does, is make sure you have lots of great conversations with your doctor, about.
Right. It's true. I think,
and then standing there going, there's lots of this that we could be doing on a stage, and then at the tail end, like swinging again back over to joining Netflix. But what I recognize is that I think all of us, we've always being in the, like, as we call it, the bleeding edge of technology, always thinking about it, working in these tool sets, but we're always also doing the salesman hat of like making the pitch, like, no, you got to do this. This is great. This is amazing. You're going to get better, you know, previs, you're going to get, you know, and then realizing like, the only way you're going to continue working is actually survival of adopting the tools. So.
Exactly. I think that, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it's really interesting, the two of you, the things you brought up, because I tend to be, as all of you know, a spirited vocal observer of a lot of this and learning by watching people do what they do. And I think what I discovered this year more than anything is how malleable and flexible and creative humans are when put up against a situation and a series of circumstances that feel unprecedented. We just kind of figure it out. Humans are much smarter than we give ourselves credit for. And we can look at technology and humanity and socialization, and we can just find a way to do it, and find a way to do it effectively and smartly. And we actually tend to learn with periods of challenge and strife that we kind of were not doing it as efficiently and as smartly as we could do it. And that's where the technologists in all of us and the innovators in all of us really start to kind of spread our wings, because we learn a lot about why we're doing things when we're put in a position that we can't do them anymore. So if you look at just the amount of hours that people used to spend worldwide commuting to things and physical places, day to day to work, all the different conferences and things that you have to go visiting sets, and how we started to realize that we can virtualize a lot of this. And at the beginnings, everybody starts to talk about fatigue and all this stuff, but then sooner or later, everybody just kind of gets really comfortable with it. And this is the new way to do things, and it's way better. And all that time you got back from not sitting in a car and on an airplane to be with your friends, to be with your family, within your bubble physically, and in the virtual world with the people that you can't be in your bubble with, it's sort of magical in some ways. And it really starts to work to our advantage, right?
I agree. I think, you know, the acceleration, as Boo was saying, you know, in all these areas, and the acceleration just of virtual experience itself being something that was, we had to sell like, well, really, this is going to mean something to your life, to where, oh, now it's a central part of your life, and the shift happening so fast. What's also interesting is that we're being in a very reactive mode with this right now. And I think that you know, to set back and look at what are the ways that this really changes creative process, really changes the way in which we work, and do a concerted effort to like get out of the box, because the real-time tools really change the nature of how you know, what I call a world building process. We're building worlds around creative IP now, and those world elements and assets have to be, you know, extremely multi-purpose now at this point. So, you know, what is the best way to do that? And there's a lot of things in the traditions of media production that don't really fit with that. And yet now we're being forced into utilizing this stuff. So the acceleration in some ways makes the reactive mind connect to it. I'm trying to step back and say, what is the ritual of creation in this new virtual environment that we're in? What's the ritual of human interaction? What's the ritual of human intimacy in the context of creation? Because it's a very intimate thing to create things with people. And that aspect of it, I think, is just fascinating. And I've always been looking at what's the onboarding ritual for virtual experience? How do you get people to be comfortable with that? You know, and obviously the LBE world was making, you know, that was the shining light on a hill we were all looking at and saying, look, it's happening, the adoption is happening. And now suddenly, oh no, it's going to be completely virtual now. And that aspect of it is just really fascinating to really consider from a kind of templating standpoint and a process flow standpoint. And that's one of the things I'm most excited to see organically happening now in this acceleration you're talking about.
Nigel, I know you're busting a gut there.
Well, I actually, and just to hop on what Brett just said there on LB, right? John, you and I, last time we saw each other was in March in Chicago at the Disabled Museum, getting to experience a wonderful piece that we worked together with Dr. King Estate and Time Magazine, and bringing Dr. King his great speech, I Had a Dream speech, to life in VR, right? And why is that? That was an amazing educational, contextual piece of content that we wanted to share with the world. And what I would say I didn't expect was the necessary, like the need now that we have to make sure we provide that in a remote setting. You know, like thinking about, like, if I, you know, my son is in his classroom right now, you know, learning gardening from videos, you know, and I have to then go in and help him figure out, you know, or doing science experiments, or even like building a world so he can do Mario Kart AR at home, whatever those things are. It's now required. Like, it's not just a, you know, a nice to have to add context. And I think where we're seeing that real acceleration, obviously LB being that kind of lifesaver for VR for a while, but now, like, look, AR really has to meet, it has to deliver. Like, otherwise, you know, beyond the gimmick, it has to provide value, and it has to be accessible too. That, like, the other thing for, you know, these walled gardens that are things like Instagram and Snapchat, and, you know, they do these amazing things, but they're very, you know, within those frameworks. Like, that's something that we, you know, we knew was coming, but I didn't see the requirement of it. I just thought it was an added value to content or to the environment. And but again, when you think of things like not just entertainment but education, you know, that, like, it's super accelerated in that sense.
Yeah, can virtual experience exist outside of the walled gardens in a way that's more democratized and more ubiquitous? That's the thing that I'm most, I mean, like, just the WebXR experimentation that's been going on, going to events and seeing how humans interact in that, and you know, you don't have to have a headset, you don't have to have a special technical knowledge. You click on the link and you're suddenly there with a kind of goofy avatar and trying to, you know, connect with people, but you can actually walk up to them and hear them better. All those virtual presence things are actually really important in giving us the humanistic view of where this is going, and that aspect of democratization and getting outside the walled gardens, I think, is incredibly important in this moment we're in right now, especially for those of us that are creating content for it. You know, we have to have ubiquity on some level, or it doesn't, you know, it starts to not work.
This is what, like, we've been saying, like, those of us who played MMOs a long time ago.
Yes, right.
And maybe last night, I don't know. Like this is what we've been saying. Oh, you know, this is what I've actually did have to admit that I did search over the weekend. I was like, what are the MMOs that are out there right now? Like, you know, from the old days of like Warcraft or like EverQuest, whatever. It's just like, what is it today? Like Skyrim? They're really, you know, you do have your first person shooter, like MOBA things, whatever, but it's like, what are the, anyway, sorry.
I'm going to go back to the Star Wars one, actually, the Star Wars Old Republic.
Right.
One, but
that was super fun.
It was fantastic.
And you know, that sense of community, you know, is what, like, was so there. And, you know, it's like, but also I do want to throw some, like, a thought out there, which is that I think that still a lot of times people are still approaching this by how do we use the technology to replicate what we had in the past, right? How do we use real-time tools for virtual production? But all we're doing is, Christina and I spoke about this yesterday, all we're doing is trying to replace Arnold with Unreal. And it's just like, that is just the wrong-headed thinking. Like, that's
agree
just
with you.
Like 1% of what the potential is, when actually you suddenly are switching the paradigm of what it means to do virtual production. Things are front-loaded. My God, you have a game engine that's incredibly smart, logic-based. Why are you just using it as a dumb rendering tool, right? Yeah. It's like the whole
Thank you for
thing switches.
I think a lot of what's happened is toe dipping. I mean, I'm a bit of a, you know, a naysayer in some of the ways in which these technologies get integrated into traditional production process. We have to get outside the box and see what the value is, way beyond just giving that one little slice a different execution. Yeah. You know, that's kind of what's been happening. You know?
It's certainly
the innovators.
I was going to say, it certainly accelerated the sort of the gang rush. I think virtual production had the same but much more accelerated moment that VR had, which was there was a lot of people that didn't know exactly, or 360 shooting. It was like, I'm not really sure what it is, but I feel left out if I don't go rushing into it. And then they got there and went, wait a minute, this is not necessarily the tool that I need. Or you know, it's like, I used to say, it's like, just because you have a 360 camera doesn't mean everything needs to be shot in 360. And the virtual production, the gang rush over there was, oh my God, this is the only way we can do it. You know, how many of you have heard that, you know, the game engine and an LED wall will solve all shooting problems?
It's
You know what
and
I-
it's an old problem being served that was solved in many other ways that are similar to it without the tracking. I mean, there's so many things that go back to processes that we've had before, and I think that there's an opportunity here to really accelerate the inspiration of the creative process with these new tools. That's the
right.
thing that is so exciting to me, and get new work that comes organically out of that. The endemic aspect of these new tools, and that's something I don't see much.
That's where the innovators are going to come in
Oh,
and basically not look at it. You don't look at a problem and be like, let me replace this. Innovation doesn't happen because, oh, I'm going to replace this with this. I'm going to do this workflow and it will translate to this. That is like early iteration of like leveraging tech. But when you really talk about creative innovation, it means I'm going to just throw it out for a minute. And how do I actually look at what's in front of me and actually look at holistically? From my standpoint as a producer, it's like that. I want to look at it holistically. I'm not just going to replace something especially because of the power of an engine and the collaborative part of how the workflow is. So
yes.
What I did find really interesting and a valuable piece of information that I didn't know that I learned from my friends at Epic is how many sites have sprung up that have these virtual LED wall and game engine linked capabilities. It's way beyond just the big boys, the Mandalorian one and all this stuff. I think there's 150 or 160 or so sites around the world now that are kind of authorized, known environments where people can shoot. So this was really important to me because I like looking at things at all budget levels. And when it's only restricted to these very large budgets and this style of material that can be done this way, I feel a sense of frustration. I like things to be democratic and open. Of course, I helped build a lot of those tools in my history, so it's in my nature to like to see the ability for everybody to have these tools. And then you start to get into these really creative discussions about the different types of technology and when is it used correctly versus overkill or used incorrectly. And I kept bringing up this point that for a lot of the stylistic way we like to look at cinematography, we like our backgrounds to be in soft focus. We don't want them to look like an NFL game where everything's in focus. We want stylistic cinema. So we're building these ultra dense, ultra expensive LED walls, and then either in the game engine or through the camera, throwing them deeply out of focus.
Exactly.
So why don't we use LED technology from 10, 15, 20 years ago that isn't as dense in the smartest way, and let it sit in the background for your long lens stuff. And then you lower the cost of entry by like a huge margin, because
there's data
that's out there in the market for the rock and roll shows and all this stuff isn't the super like tight LED stuff. It's a couple years old, and it's
the pitch
really
is different.
there has to be an immersive new wave. It's like the French New Wave came about because Eclair cameras became handheld, and people were able to go out in the streets of France and make Breathless. Jean-Luc Godard went out and made. We need to have that energy in this new era, and so one of the things I did, I made a full feature film both in 360 VR and traditional cinema simultaneously. First half of the day was 360 shooting, second half of the day was traditional, and I'm putting them together in the post-production process, saying, not throwing away the frame, but actually using the frame in an immersive mise-en-scène. And it's just because it's an experiment. We're finding out, and it's a dialogue-driven, character-driven piece, things that aren't usually done in that environment. And look, we didn't have a huge budget, and that made us think in different ways. And you have to have that, especially with young generation of new creators and media people and filmmakers and technologists coming into this. We've got to have that generation of that new wave of energy, which is not just based on giant budgets. It can't be, or it'll always. So Ted, I completely love what you just said.
And what's important there is that accessibility and sharing that new generation, right? So we are built on like all of our collective knowledge and the fortunate structures that surround us, whether it be studios or telcos, whatever it may be. But there's still a huge swath of creators that are out there that don't know how to engage in the next generation of content, right? So one of the things that we kind of focused in this year actually, and especially in light of all of the you know, the social and racial injustice that was happening this year along with everything else. You know, we wanted to make sure in the launching our platform, the Verizon Media Immersive platform, like we're creating tools and also empowering creators to be able to build on that platform. So it's not this huge thing that has to have, you know, a whole bunch of, you know, inside industry connections to be able to access it and things like that, and be able to provide it, not only the tools, but the dollars, the resources, and the artistic and technological support structure, so that a traditional sculptor can create their content and distribute it in AR, or, you know, a muralist who, you know, you can capture what that, you know, because we're all hopefully stuck at home being cautious, you know, we can't get to see all the amazing artwork that's out there, and now we can and share that in a meaningful way. So, you know, we got to do things like that with AIR, which was an Artist Revolution program that we did. But what was an interesting thing that I thought that came out of the learnings from that was, you know, again, talk about museum experiences and things like that. Even that as an accessibility point is very difficult for a lot of people, especially people, minorities and, you know, people of color. You know, that world seemed exclusive and seemed stuffy and seemed inaccessible. So suddenly you're not only, again, a requirement, as I was saying earlier, of like, oh, I can experience art at home. You're now actually allowing a whole swath of artists and creators to be able to get into a space that they would never have been able to traditionally get into, or at least had, you know, much higher friction point. So, you know, I think the balance of, and I know there's a lot of talk on the production side, but on the consumption and the empowering side, I just want to highlight again, Brett, like I do think it is super important that this new generation is aware and educated.
I think we have a platonic responsibility to make it to democratize this, because these mediums are incredibly powerful. Yep. Okay, just like cinematic medium is incredibly powerful. It changes culture. It does things. And look at what's happened with social media and the nature of you know, representative democracy. I mean, these stakes are high, and so I'm looking at it more as a storyteller in this moment. So in terms of the stories we tell and the context we set around what these new things are, and then another question I'd love to, you know, have everyone speak to is, what are we going to be delivering to this new audience participants that is beyond what has been done before? Because there's always going to be an evolution of something beyond. I mean, Ted and I are involved with a project that involves an interactive experience in a theater setting. You know, obviously that's you know, very interesting thing to talk about now, given what's happening with COVID. But, you know, I think it's going to need to go to delivering a greater world experience around creative IP. And these, you know, the democratization aspect of that is really critical, because it becomes, you know, very controlled in other ways. And this is a powerful medium. I've always, you know, basically, you know, set cautionary notes around this. That's the movies I've made have always been cautionary tales. Beware of telling cautionary tales, because it popularizes exactly what you're talking about.
Go, Brett.
You know,
I want to make sure you get the questions that you wanted to ask out there in the ether. I'm worried we're drifting.
Yeah, no, Ted, this is, you know, there was no deep probing questions, because you guys are going exactly where we're going, which is starting to unearth those things and to get people to think about this last year. Because frankly, I'm an optimist. Ted, I knew you were the eternal optimist. But it's, you know, I did a talk that was the silver linings of the pandemic, and, you know, really dived into these areas, because Nigel, you're right. We did something great together, and 2 weeks later we had to shut it down, and we haven't been able to show anybody. And the most burning moment is like, well, it forced the conversation, because it was a museum piece, but we kept asking ourselves, and certainly, you know, working with Nigel and at the Verizon, it was like, there's got to be a way to take this to other places and to enable that. And I think what's interesting is it also enabled us to shine a harsh light on what we do. Like, how many of you have been in a virtual conferencing platform that sucked and went, well, now since it's the only thing we're in,
yeah,
we're gonna have to make it better. We're gonna have to fix the thing that we were like, it doesn't, we don't have to pay much attention to it.
It's getting better continually, and I'm starting to use my virtual reality headsets for more and more collaboration sessions and learning sessions. And I've become a bit of an evangelist for, there is a way to do what you're doing and be more intimate and more connected and feel like it's a more in-person experience. And the barriers to entry used to be really difficult. The thresholds were hard. And now you're
Come way
talking
down.
about devices that are much lower than the cost of the laptop you might be on now.
Exactly.
That
Or your
allow you
phone,
to do this.
nonetheless.
Yeah.
What's that?
I said, or your phone, nonetheless. You
Or
know.
your phone number.
Well, I mean,
Thinking about the venues. What are the venues of the future, right? Are the venues that are not, like, there's a reason why there's Lil Nas X is performing in Roblox, or there's concerts in Fortnite. These are where people are, and so like those, is what's a version of Zoom that can have that level of community, or what. So I think, like, Lewis Smithingham, who's over at Media Monks, he did a great article talking about how he was taking meetings inside of Animal Crossing, doing business meetings and things like that. These are, it's compelling, and it's these world building moments, and I think it's also just where people are. So like that's
We learn
why
this from our kids, right? We learned it from our kids living
Yeah.
in the world of Minecraft and living in the world of Fortnite,
Right.
or CS:GO,
Yeah.
or any of these things. And a big part of their enjoyment isn't the gameplay,
No.
it's the social connection
Yeah.
and the finding their friends inside those worlds. This Among Us thing that is like taking over, all the
Yeah.
kids' imaginations is so interesting because it's so primitive and so basic in what it does. But what it has found is that human connection is the thing that like completely always wins the game. And
Exactly.
the tech layer that we put on it, regardless of the generation we lived on, whether, okay, we're going to go to a movie theater or a Broadway play or a concert, that was a period of time. And now we're in a period of time where the bulk of the socialization of the world, because of the pandemic and likely post-pandemic, will be more virtualized and more technologically based rather than in-person based, because you can do it at scale. You can take it in very creative and different directions. And the cost metrics of putting on an in-person environment versus a virtual environment, even the most sophisticated virtual environments, is exponentially less expensive, like much less expensive and more scalable. So you can invite more people to the party, as it were.
That evangel has gotten a lot easier since March of last year. That's for sure. I mean, it was pushing a boulder up a hill for a lot of people that were very set in their business model, and I always thought, look, there's going to be a new normal with virtual experience, and now the new normal is here. And it's, I think that human connection that you're talking about is the critical thing we need to really look at in the design of environments, in the design of the onboarding process. I still don't see enough of a ritual that is creating, the kids, watching what the kids are doing with the things you're talking about, really starts to give you an inkling of what needs to be brought in on a much more massive scale into virtual experience in general. And that intimacy aspect is like, that's what we all crave. We all crave that connection. I think this is I'm an optimist too. I think there's an opportunity for virtual experience to be a reset of, I call it the global human. It could be the medium of the global human, where we're connecting with each other just as humans on this globe, as opposed to all in our own separate little bubbles. I know there's a bit of a naivete to that as well, but I want to see that this medium goes in that direction. And I think there's a generation coming up, several generations, that's what they're aching for. That's what they want it to be about. So we can meet that, in a pretty strong way right now. And that's what I think the opportunity is.
I think that, like to have basically the healthy gamified community, right? That basically is utility, it's entertainment, it's where they go for technology as well. Like, that's what I feel like we were kind of driving towards that, with 5G, we're going to have smart spaces in cities and all that in the connected human, right? Because it's beyond IoT at this point, way beyond IoT. And then of course, once we start to become more bionic, it will be, the connected human. But I think it is about like finding that kind of a healthy gamified space, and it's like beyond like the kind of the various social platforms, or the very in a way walled off gardens of games. Or maybe it's fine, you don't need to have one community, it can be a network of communities. But I love the idea about the conference, within Animal Crossing. But today I actually want to do my conference call on, in Minecraft instead, for instance. Come, forget the usual suspects, that we're on. I'm going to send you an invite to something else.
Yeah, bring it. I think and what's interesting is that we say game of, the game environment of the game, it is bringing that healthy element and recognizing what it is, right? To me, it's just interactivity, right? Whether it's the gaming layer of achieving something or something, but it's that healthy world that we've seen in the gaming world, the MMO world, where, whole communities formed where they never knew what race, creed, color, age, anybody was. And they were having a cohesive unit and socialization. And the people that were on the outside going, it's just games, right?
Right.
Now we're like finding themselves having Zoom nights, where everybody's getting together and it's like, oh, these things aren't that far apart anymore. And I think it's just that rapid push that we've seen over the last 6 or 9 months of saying, okay, shine the harsh light on some of these things that were interesting or nice to have, to say, no, we got to make this work and apply our energies to it. And, our kids, being in those social groups, in some cases, may have transitioned better to being, in this period of COVID and remote learning than all of us who had to go stay in our little corners and only interact this way, right? Like we adults are learning what our kids knew. And I think we're not going back. We're just going to evolve this. Look, I want to see all of you in person.
Yes.
Dying to get on a plane to see you all in person, one way or the other. But the nice thing is that we can be okay when that's not always happening.
Yes.
Good to question it. Maybe not to have more of a negative tone. One thing though I've been thinking about for me personally is the decay or the half-life of creativity in this space of, actually Reed Hastings and Netflix gave a great article talking about how, it's great we can be collaborative, but we're in a way we're riding the wave of the built knowledge that we have already. But now that we're detached, right? We are losing some of that, the freshness, the nuance, the magic that happens in the room. And I go to, I guess I feel like I'm sponsored by the Mario AR, but the Nintendo did a great job there in that from an AR experience. Before I even play that with my son, we figure out what the world is. We're down in the ground building Legos or building magnet tiles, and it's this really fun, creative energy that it's just, I kind of was like, wow, this is really a nice moment with my kid, but it's also like, something I've kind of lost in the world of, like, I used to be able to get that energy from creative in the room, and I do feel, that's the eagerness to get back is with that purpose in mind. So all of that to say is I'm curious to see if we think there'll be more purpose-driven moments like beyond, to try and drive those creative energy, or does anyone else feel that decay, so to speak?
Yep, these are our wrap-up final thoughts. So based on that, and you're right, Nigel, it's not all roses and virtual. Wrap up, go ahead, Ted. You had about something to say.
I'll give you my wrap up on that front. Yep. I think it's interesting, and I think a lot about that, and I've read a lot about it. And what is fascinating for someone that is deeply involved in the tech world with lots of very large tech partners is and there's a lot of critique and a lot of discussion about this, we have actually entered an age that is not tremendously innovative because of the giganticness of certain companies and platforms that absorb innovation and don't let it flourish and either quash it or hide it inside their walled gardens.
Yes.
So there's an interesting reference point to in the United States to when the interstate highway system was connected, and you had this sort of massive sameness, and you lost a lot of the uniqueness and individuality of small town America, where you could go to this amazing restaurant, this amazing place, this amazing tourist attraction, and then everything became an Applebee's and a Walmart.
Strip mall.
we're sort of in the tech version of that now. So there's an argument that to be deeply critique about this, that Amazon has prevented a lot of innovation. And when people study this era of time, the last 20 years, we have actually had less true innovation than we had the 20 years before that, because of the size and the monstrous ability of these companies to actually suck these companies in before they have a chance to blossom. And, you know, Nigel, you work for one of these large companies, Verizon, big telecom company. They do this too. And a lot of companies do it from a survival standpoint, from a need standpoint, but it's an interesting thing to think about and discuss as to we lose individuality when we don't allow it to flourish. And when large companies feel like they have to continue to swallow and gobble everything in their way.
I totally agree. Totally agree, Ted. That is a big issue right now. And you know, we have, like, for me, we've got to tell stories about this. We have to set context for people to understand that aspect. And, you know, in the film business, obviously the entire business model is now, you know, 52 card pickup. I mean, it's all in the air. That actually is an opportunity because we're being forced into looking at what are we going to deliver? How are we going to deliver it? What are the innovations that are necessary for survival, where, you know, the industry wouldn't necessarily act on those things as rapidly if this wasn't happening. So I think, you know, in our particular industry, there's actually a bubble happening that possibly could force that innovation even quicker. But I agree, the overarching moment we're in from, you know, the giant companies you're talking about is something we have to, you know, for lack of a better term, battle against. It really is.
Well, I think that we will see, you do see the innovation coming out of the large companies, but they take the time to really polish that, right? You're not going to see that big AR innovation until 2022 or 2023. Whereas we could have like 10 different startups all putting out, you know, AR specs and all sorts of other technology. Instead, you have companies either buying them and then throttling the time and developing and slowly innovating until it's really market ready, right? When it's market ready, we're ready to go global, we have a production line, then we go. You know, and it is a different pace. Like, I find that the innovation these days happens in applied innovation. Whatever is there, we make do with what we have, and we get really scrappy about it, and we try to innovate. And in some cases, you do get bought by a giant. In other cases, you don't, and you do have some innovation. But it is a different pace. But I think that the applied innovation, because of this, is actually pretty quick, because it has to be.
Yeah, and just to go on, like, when you think about applied innovation, I think that's like our desire as we're innovating, that it's adopted. But I propose, even in these conversations that we've been having, the need for us to lean into being fearless this year, risk taking for even just for the idea of like what we've been talking about. Also, as human beings, our deep desire is this connectedness, right? So it's a connectedness to each other, it's a connectedness to story, and then how do we enable that to happen, the connectedness, so that multiple, like, different perspectives, different cultures, new voices have an opportunity to be heard. And so I think, like, we're already doing this every day, but I think it's also in leadership for us to, like, help release that fearlessness of, like, keep going. Like, if we just focus on how do we adopt, we're not focusing on the innovation that needs to happen. And what, Nigel, you shared about, you know, gameplay with your kids, it's like, we already know what those specific things are. My kids are so into, like, they could spend hours on Among Us. And I know exactly what you're talking about, Ted. It's that desire to just have fun with a friend. They're just doing it over a platform, but it could have been a game board. You know, it could have just been in a physical realm. And I think the other thing is looking at that, like I love big sports. I love going to sports. I love going to, like, events. Why do I like to do that? And that's because I like that feeling I have being in there, right? These are all things that we've designed and done, but also having that shared experience. And so I think it's, my whole thing is just keep pushing. Don't feel, oh gosh, I have to adopt it or help these people adopt. Our jobs are to keep innovating.
Thank you. No, thanks everyone. And I think it is, the watchword is, you know, it's been disrupted. In disruption, we can do some amazing things, but we have to seize those moments. And I think, you know, the democratization, the ability to grow is going to happen. And it is a pleasure working with all of you. I hope to see all of you in person sooner than later. And thank you so much for joining us today. So I
Great to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Cheers. Take care.
Bye.
Aloha.